My name's Erin, and I'll be co-hosting the webinar today with Steph on behalf of WonderNETwork. So if you're not familiar with us, we're a London-based creative agency that works solely in the drinks industry, and this is the WonderNETwork community. So the webinar is part of the community of drinks professionals who meet quarterly to network, share insights, learn from one another about the modern day drinks industry. And today's webinar, which is entitled Raising the Bar on Sustainability in Drinks, is the drinks industry walking the talk, hopes to do just that. And it's a topic that we feel is more timely and relevant than ever. So I'll just say a little bit more about that before handing over to our amazing host and panel. But yeah, so from our perspective as a creative agency specializing in drinks, we've really witnessed how sustainability has become quite a critical focus for drinks brands. Some have led the charge with innovative eco-friendly practices, while others are really just beginning to adapt to stay relevant and meet demand on a global scale. So the drinks industry has already made significant strides in sustainability, but there's a long way to go. So we've seen initiatives from adopting sustainable sourcing, packaging, carbon negative or carbon neutral production, as well as building bigger initiatives kind of around community engagement, government lobbying, and responsible marketing, etc. So the global climate crisis has really accelerated this shift, really looking at how brands can move beyond token efforts to comprehensive, sustainable strategies that engage consumers and really work to balance that triple bottom line, so people, planet, and profit as well. But as I said, there's still a long way to go, and we as a panel feel that critical shifts are still needed within the overall industry to really drive meaningful, long-term, systematic change. So today, we'll be looking at all this and a little bit more, taking a deep dive into topics such as the current state of sustainability in our industry, effective sustainable sourcing and production, innovations in packaging and distribution, looking at a few examples of sustainable serves and how drinks brands can work to craft one, and then going even further, looking at how it's not just about the environment, but also about citizens and communities too. And then overall, really taking a holistic approach to building a sustainable future in drinks. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Steph, who's our wonderful co-host, a close WonderNETworks friend, and a real expert in sustainable practices within drinks. So I'll say a little bit, and I'm sure Steph will say more about herself as well. But we think of Steph as really a true eco-warrior and sustainability champion within our industry. Kind of fed up with not seeing the change that she really wanted to, Steph created her own brand, Absolut Spirits, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. It's a sustainable Calvados with an aim to be the world's most planet positive spirit, and was born kind of out of a deep desire to have a positive impact on the world and to really create meaningful change, allowing people to enjoy drinks without giving the planet a hangover. And I'm sure Steph will go into a lot more detail about that herself. But she's also the creative brains behind Drinking Out Loud consultancy, which is where she works with premium brands to ignite purpose in them and create a commitment to sustainability and innovation within their brands as well. So Steph, we're delighted to have you here with us today and to share your knowledge with us. So thank you very much. And now, without further ado, let me hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Erin. It's always much nicer to be introduced by somebody else. But if you are not familiar with Absolut and Calvados, please do take a look, because all those wonderful visuals and all those beautiful words were indeed crafted by the amazingly talented team at WonderNETworks Communications. So it is always a pleasure to host these various panels with them. This is actually my second one since the series started round about COVID time. The first one was more focused on women in the drinks industry, and so I'm really happy to be back again, this time talking about that hot/wet topic depending on the day, global climate crisis. Whoopee, on a Monday as well. But no, in all fairness, thank you everyone for joining. It really is really important that we gather first and foremost and actually recognize that our industry, as much as we love it, has tremendous impact on the environment. Now, whether that be from the vineyards, the fields and the orchards, to the breweries and the distilleries, and then onwards to the bars and restaurants. Every single step of our production and our distribution process has a footprint. And that footprint can be, of course, trodden with more or less care. But the good news is that we hold the power to make significant impact. And by adopting sustainable practices, we can indeed not just reduce our emissions, but go that bit further. We can look at how we can conserve our precious water resource, minimize waste. And it's more than just protecting the environment. It's also about how we ensure the longevity and resilience of our own businesses and the communities that we serve. So I am speaking to you today as a drinks entrepreneur myself. And so I'm really excited actually to be introducing you all to our panelists, because these are some fantastic individuals that I've had the opportunity to work with either directly because of the work we do at Avalon, and or indirectly because those of us that really give a shit, we tend to find our way to one another. So without further ado, thank you again for joining this vital conversation. And I will ask you, first of all, panelists, the question: as leaders in sustainability, how do you perceive the current state of sustainability within our industry? And I'll ask you to introduce yourselves as you answer the question. Shall we start with Ian?
Fab. Thank you, Steph. And thank you to Erin and to the rest of the team and to everybody who's joined. Because I know Monday, most days will have many other priorities, and great that everyone is giving some time to, I think, collaborate on this. And while we're on the panel, really looking forward to engaging with everyone in the next hour or so, and hopefully beyond that as well. So my name's Ian McPherson. I work with EcoSpirits. So and for those of you who do not know, EcoSpirits is a circular economy technology company, which in short means that we have technology that allows wine and spirit companies to enter the circular economy. And Steph, I think your question was, how do we view sustainability in the industry? I think from our perspective, let me give a couple of stats that maybe put that into perspective. There are, on an annual basis, 70 billion bottles produced within the wine spirits industry to be used just once, single-use bottles. And by 2025, there'll probably be 95 billion. So the opportunity is huge. I think we're barely scratching the surface as an industry. And you imagine bars throwing out the glass that you had just enjoyed a drink out of every time somebody had a drink out of it. That would just seem incredibly foolish. But that said, at this point in time, we're delighted to see an increasing amount of really exciting sustainable packaging innovations appear. Lots of companies looking at how they can tackle the problem of packaging waste and carbon emissions. So on that, I think I'll pass back to you, to one of the team.
Brilliant. Thank you for that answer. All right, so Caroline, tell us how you see the current status of sustainability in the drinks industry, and tell us a little bit more about who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Caroline, founding partner at Citizen Good. So we work with brands to help them accelerate what they're doing on sustainability, be that helping to amplify it, or be it creating a sustainability strategy or bringing it to life. And when we look at sustainability, we're thinking about that in regard to long-term well-being for people and planet. So it's absolutely about the environmental side, but as you mentioned, Steph, it is absolutely about the communities and people as well. And I'm quite encouraged by the drinks industry, actually, because I work across sectors and I see a lot of innovation happening in the drinks industry. And what's particularly interesting to me is that not only is innovation happening within the supply chain, there's lots of new ideas and there is the starts of lots of collaboration, but we're also talking about it through our brands as well. And that really helps inspire others, spreads the news, and gets other people on the bus, which is definitely a good thing.
Amazing. And do we know where the bus is going?
Not entirely, but to some extent, I think as long as we've got positive momentum, that's the thing to encourage more people to get on the bus. And the key thing is we need scale and need everybody taking action.
Brilliant. I tend to agree. It's very much a time for people to roll their sleeves up. All right. And last but not least, well, I would say my favorite duo in the drinks industry, if it wasn't for my own one, but Emma, over to you.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Russ. It's Gemma. We're Two Drifters Distillery, producing rum from scratch in the southwest down in Exeter, and yeah, we do so with a carbon negative footprint. And so think about the full life cycle of our products. And yeah, you're going to answer the question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, where we are in the
we talk as one.
Yeah, go on.
Well, yeah, I'm Gemma. I'm kind of the more marketing brand story side of Two Drifters, although when we're as busy as we are, we all kind of get mucked in next door at the distillery. Caroline, I'm pleased you're positive about the drinks industry because I get quite frustrated and I'm very impatient and probably a bit more negative and skeptical than that. I think there's a lot of hype. I think there's a lot of talk. I think there's a lot of target setting. But the whole point of those is to reduce climate change and to stop it all. And I'm just not quite sure we're doing enough now. The future looks amazing. We're all sustainable in the future. We need to be doing it now. And I'm not sure enough are.
Thank you, Gemma. That leads perfectly on to our first poll question of this session. So, Aaron, if we could launch that for our audience. Our first question is, what do you think is the biggest challenge the drinks industry faces in achieving sustainability? Now, again, sustainability is a big word. It's a complex eco-web, but nonetheless, from a holistic point of view, what would you suggest it is? Do you think we need to reduce our carbon emissions? Do you think it's minimizing single-use glass? Do you think it's about the raw materials? Or are we needing to focus our efforts and energy on eco-friendly packaging? Looking forward to hearing the answer.
Give you guys another couple seconds or so. See some answers coming in, fast and furious. That's good. Give it another few seconds.
There were loads more, sorry. And also consumer awareness and government and balancing. I mean, honestly, if it's not all of them, then I'm not too sure there is.
All right. Great. I think, oh, still going. All right. Yeah, let's share results and see where we're at.
Okay.
All right.
Fair enough. It's a pretty even distribution. I'd love to hit something else. That's 7% there. The three of you that said something else, if you could just maybe type in the chat, I have no idea, or whatever you think the other thing may be, would be super, super curious to hear your thoughts. But yeah, essentially balancing sustainability with profitability, that's really interesting and something that we'll come to talk about further down during the session. You know, it is really important that we're able to consolidate sustainable business with sustainable environment. And I think a few of us on here could definitely talk to that. And just before we move on to this case for commercialization, another question for you all, audience. So, how many of you today are impacted by at least one of these issues? So this is a single choice answer. And Aaron, I can't see them.
Oh no. So they were the issues from previously. So the ones we just had up, the things we just talked about. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Great.
Panelists, any thoughts? Given that we cannot partake in this Monday morning pub quiz.
Yours would always be carbon emissions.
I think, yeah, the carbon emissions is
Yeah.
the big one, but that drives all the others. But
Yeah.
Ian's would always be same, or the single-use glass specifically?
Right.
As I was reading through, there's probably quite a few, and maybe the diplomatic answer is to say all of them. They're rather than the parochial one that just is a focus for ecospirits. It's I think this is very much a collaborative approach. It's going to be.
Great. So let's share results.
Okay, so 50% I am impacted by multiple of these issues for my brand and business. Yeah, makes sense. There's a lot for us to address, and thankfully we do have some solutions and some learnings that we can share with you all. And before we move on to this case for commercialization, I just wanted to bring up that 7% that said something else. Sieste Offringer, I believe. You're mentioning water. Thank you for bringing that up as one of our rarest and most precious resources, and an ingredient that we use a whole lot of in our production process when it comes to making alcohol. So I think such an important topic to mention. Right. So leaping right into the kind of hot topic around sustainable business, profitability of people and planet, I think it's fair to say that, you know, our industry is quite complex. You know, we're not just simple manufacturers selling a product to an end customer. We have to navigate quite an intricate web of routes to markets and margin shares. And this involves buyers and gatekeepers and distributors and F&B managers. And then, of course, we've got the tax authorities that like to take a significant portion of that value chain. Not to mention, we've also got the writers and the journalists. And I know some of you on this webinar today. So as you can see, it's quite an intricate, complex web of business for our products to reach our cherished customers. And then once we get it on shelf, we then still have to kind of convince them that sustainability matters and that it's really worth the price. So how do we balance sustainability and profit? And do they really go hand in hand? Gemma, I know you feel strongly about this, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I do feel strongly about this. And yes, I think sustainability will only succeed if it's profitable. Sustainable businesses and products will only succeed if they are better than the alternative as well. I think it's an area that as Two Drifters grows, we're getting a lot bigger and more exciting customers. And those customers have been used to dealing with bigger rum brands, household names than us. They want to support us. They want to have a B Corp, startup, entrepreneur, sustainable, carbon negative, British, made from scratch rum. They want to support that. They want to have that on their menu. But for years, they've had this such a low price that we're never going to compete on. And we're still struggling to find the way of trying to see all those other things that we have value rather than just a price tag against it, because when it comes to price, we're not going to win. And for the world to change and for the drinks industry to change, the consumers and the gatekeepers and the wholesalers and the distributors have to see the other stuff as value as well, because if it's just price, then we're probably not going to win. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything Jem is saying. I think the way that I frame it in my thinking is in a market kind of way. They're not pricing in, nothing's priced in there in terms of it. There's no price for the impact that you have on the planet. There's no price for the carbon impact as well. There's no price for any of the other sustainability criteria. They're not accounted for in that number. And so there's no way for that to be kind of benchmarked against. And I think while that exists as an issue, then you always face that problem. Yeah.
And we submit tenders now, so they're quite, you don't get to speak to the person about your rum and spend an hour and a half talking them through our carbon negative footprint and how it's credible and how transparent it is. You submit a tender through a portal and there's a paragraph for how are you achieving your sustainable future goals, and then the rest is just a price page. It's just a price war, and I think that has to change, because that's not going to change anything within the drinks industry, from lowering carbon emissions, from helping the climate. But it also means that the likes of brands like Two Drifters and Avalon, there's a ceiling that we're never going to get through if we're always having to fight price.
Really, really valid points. And I think the early win was that there was even a box asking about sustainable practices, you know, just what, 3 years ago, if that, and all of a sudden that box has become a everyone must do. So someone has an answer, they all have an answer. Now, how do we weigh up whose initiative is of more value than the others becomes a huge piece of educational work that is what I'd say would take a lifetime. Unfortunately, we don't have that time available to us. And Gemma, Russ, before we move on, talk to us about the gatekeepers. These gatekeepers, the buyers specifically. What is kind of the demand that we need to see from them, and not even just us as producers, but more as customers, citizens, consumers, the other side? How can we get these buyers to deliver meaningful, purpose-driven products?
See, this is where I think it gets difficult, because you cannot really blame those decision makers and those organizations for the way that they're geared up to behave, because there's no jeopardy for not doing it. So until there's some form of jeopardy, and by that I mean regulation, that says you cannot behave in this way, then I don't see that it'll change it. It'll simply be driven by economics, unless you end up with a buyer or someone with a decision to make who prices above doing the right thing because they believe in it for the planet, above just ticking boxes and making the numbers work, which there's so few people in reality will do that. You're always going to fight that issue.
We talk about the carrot and the stick, and we've tried the carrot for a few years now, hoping that people would do the right thing, but they're not. So now it might have to be the stick.
We're definitely all going to stick mode. Yeah. Caroline, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I feel like it's a topic quite close to what you do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a massive education piece to go on in general, in terms of educating citizens of the true cost or price of goods, so that actually sustainable focused brands can get the credit for doing that. So in fact, there is an example. I don't think they've announced the results yet, but last year in Holland, there was a pilot with the true pricing initiatives looking at the true cost of coffee. So if you added plant-based milk versus cow's milk, and making sure that the climate and social impact, obviously that's certainly in coffee, the social impact is as pressing as the environmental impact, and to educate citizens on that true price and paying that premium, and seeing if they would be willing to pay for the true price or not. That's being extended. I know I was at a session last week at the Gardens of Tomorrow, House of Hackney, the interiors and fashion brand. They've got a collaboration going on with the True Pricing Initiative at the moment. So we're at its infancy, but there is a bit of a movement starting to happen to elevate and educate people on the true cost of those impacts from a people and planet perspective. So super early days, and I will get into the weeds and find out if we can find out any results from that trial last year. The other side is obviously regulation, and that's where there's a huge amount of regulation coming down the track. On the one hand, it can't come soon enough. I'm sure that will help everybody to be able to emphasize what they're doing on this agenda. But on the other hand, that is having a big impact on sustainability professionals. So actually, to come back on Gemma's point of, yes, I am positive about the potential of what can happen in the drinks industry, and I see so many wonderful initiatives. Do I see them at the scale and the breadth that we need across the whole industry? No. But I'm really hopeful that this legislation will encourage, as there are certainly enough drinks players that have not got a strong enough story or performance, most importantly performance, then story, to be able to back that up. So that when they are filling in the procurement processes, they will not be able to tick the boxes in the way that they would And I'm encouraged from the likes of Mondra and Manufacturer 2030, where they are collaborating at a retailer level, certainly in the UK, to set standards and share data. So all of it's in its infancy. Is it having an impact on actually the mental well-being and the pressures of sustainability directors? Yes, because they're focused too much almost on the reporting than the doing. And that's a real challenge right now.
Thank you, Caroline. So yeah, that mix of regulation alongside these personal initiatives, these individuals, which actually do spark movements, and movements, as we know, they can really create
Change happen.
Yeah. Okay. And so then, Ian, your take on this. I mean, you are scaling theoretically this technology, this solution to end single-use glass, but you're working with the small and the big global drinks giants. And I think it's important that we do remind ourselves that the drinks industry is somewhat consolidated. There are 10, 12 global players that sell more than 90% of our global spirits. So just really key to highlight that when we're talking about scalability, we do need to mention these 10 big companies. So Ian, what are your thoughts?
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, I think EcoSpirits, we are, incredibly thankful to be working with both large and small players across the industry. And many of the early adopters were premium independent brands and distributors. Where actually embracing EcoSpirits technology helps them overcome some of those challenges that listening to Gemma and Russ speak there about, for that some of the smaller brands have in competing with the large companies and their economies of scale. There's a number of benefits that apply to any brand that's using the technology, the reduction in packaging costs and 95% reduction in the waste. And even from the smallest independent brands, the technology is accessible, probably from as little as about 309-litre cases in the on-trade. So that means that it is attractive, as you know, Steph, to Avalon or Portofino Gin or Coconut Cartel. EcoSpirits makes a difference, a significant difference in their operation. I think if you're a global brand, interestingly, there are some aspects that may be harder because there's more people in a much larger brand, there's more stakeholders, it's more difficult to pivot. We've spent years optimizing a linear model, but of course the impact and the volume of glass and therefore energy that is saved or reduced is massive. And it is a slower process for us. We often have to deploy pilot programs, confirm the commercial viability of their products in circular before we significantly scale up. But as you say, we are now doing that. So Diageo have signed a global agreement and they will launch and deploy EcoSpirits probably in 18 markets over the next 2 to 3 years. Pernod Ricard have also signed a global agreement. They're rolling out Havana Club in format, in EcoTote format earlier this year in Cuba. And Remy Cointreau have also signed an agreement following some really successful pilots in London, and where actually we're seeing people, gatekeepers or buyers, make those choices. Where actually there are now thousands of bars around the world who are making the choice to stock products because they're in EcoTote format, and I think that's incredibly encouraging, and seeing the massive impact as well, the likes of Bacardi that we did with the Carnival Cruise Line, and of course the cruise line and global travel retail are ones that will look in great detail at their impact upon the environment. So I think today what needs to happen, I think that smaller independent brands already compete with the large global ones. And as Gemma said, when you remove cost of it, there's lots of other ways that smaller brands compete, whether it's on taste or marketing, working with bar staff who are big influencers. And it's just great that actually we are seeing some gatekeepers make those decisions, as Russ says, doing the right thing over the commercial aspect. But of course, we believe that actually EcoSpirits technology can be more efficient and cost effective, and therefore actually close that gap, and doesn't need to be one or the other.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think when we talk about making the commercial case for sustainability, we're having to look at so many angles within the industry and approaching it from all these different areas. Essentially, we all want to get to the same outcome. But it is a balancing act. So moving into a conversation around sort of sustainable sourcing, raw materials, energy production, it's kind of my favorite subject really at Avalon. I wanted to ask the audience a few other questions and just see how engaged they are. So we have a question on water. It's not a trick question. It reads like a trick question. So does tap water have a high or low carbon footprint? It should be a yes or no, high or low. I'm hoping. Again, I can't see the answers, Aaron.
It might have been phrased like a trick question, but we'll see. Keep you on your toes. Great. All right. All right, give you guys a few more seconds. All right, here we go. Fabulous. You see those results?
Lovely.
Yeah.
So high, low, somewhere in the middle, not sure. High or low compared to what? Yep, I hear you. It is a strange question. I think the question is there to just remind us that it actually has a really, really, really high impact. Just like you would, generating electricity for your kettle or driving your car, their efforts to maintain and purify your water takes up heaps and heaps and heaps of energy. And I think we've got a stat specific for the UK. This is definitely a Russ stat. I'll read it, but essentially it says that we require 4,645 liters of water per person every day. That's wild, resulting in 3.68 million tons of CO2e per year from the supply and treatment of our water. Is that right, Russ?
I don't know. That one wasn't me, actually.
Wasn't you?
But it does sound right. It's exceedingly high. It's always surprising. But all the stats like that are surprising. It's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's just to put it in perspective as we get into the conversation around production. This is just one individual, one itty bitty person having heaps of impact. It definitely puts it into perspective. And this is definitely a question that the two drifters like then. Do trees, next poll question, do trees, keyword here, permanently remove carbon emissions? And this is a yes or no answer.
Let's see.
Russ, prep yourself to
fight.
response.
All right, couple more seconds. Great. All right, let's share results.
So who's right, who's wrong here, Russ?
I would say no, they don't permanently remove carbon emissions. Perhaps some will be sequestered and permanently stored, but it takes millions of years to get to that state. Most will not, and most of that CO2 that's captured by the plant as it grows will be back in the atmosphere.
Okay, so the answer is trees don't last forever. So I think maybe here there's a little thing around consumer messaging of, hello, we plant, trees for every bottle we sell and or there is a little bit of mitigation and understanding to be done around offsetting, which is something we can get into. But I suppose when we're talking about sustainability of raw materials, we really have to think about the entirety of the production process. At the end of the day, alcohol is made from something, and that something tends to be grown in a field, whether that's sugarcane or grain or agave or apples grown in beautiful orchards. You know, there is a variety of raw material from which we can actually make alcohol. And that's, at least in our view at Avalon, where we kind of started the premise of our work, because it was the beginning of the story, and felt that that is where we were having the most environmental impact, and addressing what raw material we made our spirit from was our kind of key focus point, and that led us to orchards and apples and regenerative farming. But again, there are varied approaches that we can take to this. So I will start with Russ and Gemma. Your approach is very much about this cradle to grave. We're looking at energy and the source of that energy, right, as your key kind of sustainability approach when it comes to production. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the carbon negative footprint that the distillery had of explain exactly how that's done, and then the rest of it will make sense. But basically, we think about the CO2 emissions from that field that you just described right the way through to the consumer drinking your product, consuming it in some way, and then onwards to the recycling. So you have this what's called cradle to grave approach to the impact that a bottle will cause. And you think about what are all the bits that make up that journey, what's in that life cycle. So you've got everything being grown in the field, everything of your raw materials and all of that sourcing. It may not happen locally to you, right? And then it needs to get to the distillery. So you have one aspect, which is, okay, we've got the farming, we've got farm machinery, we've got irrigation, we've got the pesticides, the fertilizers, all those things, whether or not they're in your process. There's emissions caused by each part of that process. Then that's transported somewhere, processed again in terms of, for us, our sugar, and then transported again, processed again, and then that's transported to the UK. And there's a large amount of emissions just in getting the raw ingredients to the distillery. And of course, you've got the distillery itself and its energy use, its water use, and all the other footprint that goes into actually producing the product there. Obviously, that each, I can't go through everything because we'll be here forever, but basically all of those raw ingredients come together at the distillery. They're processed into another package, the alcohol, the rum that we're after, and that's then transported again. It's more emissions there. Then you're into how it's consumed, where it's consumed, what happens to it in a warehouse, what happens on a shelf in a bar, ice cubes production, on and on. All of those things need to be thought about. And then eventually your consumer will responsibly recycle it, or the bar will, and then that will take energy to get it to the recycling center and energy to process. Yeah, so all of those aspects, that forms a life cycle. And there's a massive amount of impact. Two Drifters, we then commit to removing more than we calculate those emissions are. And then here we see the stats of how much we avoided, although already this is far out of date and it's constantly evolving because we need to remove as we sell. And, we're still here as a distillery, so we're still selling.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a very quick explanation of what we do. The way that we achieve the carbon removal, and the reason why we were talking about the trees, is we use a company called Climeworks. We have a partnership with Climeworks in Switzerland. They have a technology called direct air capture that sucks CO2 straight out of the atmosphere with a machine, and it's physically turned into stone and permanently stored underground. So this physical removal from the atmosphere is only achieved by turning it into a form that can't end up back in the atmosphere. That's the way that you achieve a carbon negative footprint. Obviously, remove more impact than you cause.
Yes, but Climeworks is expensive.
Yeah, so obviously the big part about that is the cost, which is why it's unique, as you said, and not everyone does it. What that does to a distillery like us is acts as a tax, internal carbon tax on every decision. So you have to find a way to avoid it if you can. Have to find a way to find the lowest carbon route. And yeah, that's that cost And that impact, that penalty that we've put on ourselves is what drives the distillery, us to do things the way that we do.
And to put in perspective, we were at Climeworks last week, and the only two customers who have committed to long-term carbon removal as they grow are Microsoft and Two Drifters.
There's a long way to go.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining. I think as you kind of stack up what creates a life cycle analysis, it's so far removed from a marketing image of a producer and their bottle, right? Now we tend to see nice pictures of agave fields and sometimes a Mexican señor or señora with a sombrero doing their thing, but it is debatable how true that is to the actual impact of everything that is going on behind the scenes. And we can't get into the full extent of it. We'd need to talk about waste disposal at distillery levels. We'd need to be looking at, as you mentioned, irrigation and pesticide abuse in fields of barley and such. But I think what we really wanted to do in that little segment there with Russ and Gemma was highlight that production is hugely, hugely important. So what we make it from and then how we make it are critical to the overall impact of a bottle of spirit. And I'm going to keep us moving forward because I think it's interesting to look at this sort of holistic approach to sustainability within the space. And here I feel like moving into the packaging sector again with you, Ian, is quite important. There are so many different formats and ways that we can then get this liquid, which we've produced the best way we possibly could, respecting environment from regenerative agriculture. We are fermenting and distilling it, optimizing resource and energy and all the rest. But then how do we get this without taking back all the good that we've tried to do at a production side? What are our solutions?
It's a great question, Steph, because as we move forward in many ways to have less of an impact on our environment, to use our resources more wisely, none of us really want to do that with a sort of reductive future that means we can't enjoy the things that we're doing. And for many of us involved here, it's because we want to maintain and enhance that ability going forward. So, one of the I guess one of the key elements and pillars of eco spirits, and for those who don't know, and it's probably helpful if I give a very quick overview. The eco spirit system allows spirits and wines to be transported in bulk to local markets, and then they're processed into the fully reusable 4.5 litre eco tote that I think Aaron showed earlier on. It's delivered to bars and restaurants and hotels. And once that's in the venue, the spirits are transferred from the eco-tote into reusable bottles or other serving formats with their smart pour technology. And once the eco-tote is emptied, it's then returned to the eco-plant where it's sanitized, refilled, sealed, and all of that together then the eco-spirit system fully replaces the traditional single-use bottle. And part of the pouring solution, Steph, is, glass we know looks after wines and spirits incredibly well. So the eco-tote has a 4.5 litre glass inner and glass jar, but the pouring solutions also allow bottles to be refilled so that all of us here could go and enjoy an appletini, and as the bartender makes that cocktail up, then we see them using bottles. So actually our experience in the bar doesn't change, and that's part of the solution that's got to be right for outlets and bars, as well as other solutions that Aaron had shown on the on screen. And so you can see there.
Let's before you take us through the detail again of the specifics, let's just ask the question to the audience. How many years does it take glass to decompose? What do we think that is? Because we'll talk about glass a lot for the next kind of segment. And it's such a beautiful, noble material. It's also pretty fragile as well. I find it fascinating that we continue to ship liquid around a fragile vessel all around the world. But I think we have the Industrial Revolution to thank for that. So how many years does it take for glass to decompose? We've got a few answers, I believe.
Yeah. So we've got 500, 4,000, so up to 500, up to 4,000, up to 1 million, up to 25,000, or up to 100.
Caroline, you know the answer.
Great. All right.
Okay. So, Ian, what do we think?
Well, the answer is up to 1 million years, which is phenomenal.
I think there's a current, if the internet tends to say 4,000 as an entry stat, but the key here is, again, the word up to 1 million.
Yeah.
It is an astounding amount of time. How long have we been on the planet? To put it into perspective, something like 300,000 years. Yeah, the last ice age was 12,000 years ago. Our Gregorian calendar seems to think that it's 2024, but then we'd be finding, it's an obscene amount of time. Really difficult to fathom. And okay, so here's another interesting one. How many single-use glass, spirit, and wine bottles were produced in 2020? And this is a global stat we have from EcoSpirits. So how many globally? And these we're assuming, well, primarily will be single-use linear bottles. What are the options?
We've got 3 trillion, 10 million, 70 billion, or 500,000.
Yeah. Okay, and what do we have as an answer? Right. I think that sounds about right, doesn't it? 70 billion, Ian?
It's I'm delighted that either there's a lot of good guesses or somebody actually was listening to me half an hour ago, which is great.
Well
So
done.
yes, the stat is not great. I think it's just the single-use aspect of that is phenomenal.
Yep, and that number is estimated to increase to 95 billion by 2025. Is that right?
That's correct. So our industry grows and demand for it grows, but and that actually just highlights the growing need for a better solution.
And so, and Caroline, I'm going to ask you to chime in now with your take, but just to wrap up on this piece, Ian, can you maybe emphasize the difference here between why EcoSpirits isn't striving for just recyclability of glass? What is that difference between recycle and sort of reuse and that circularity piece? Why is that so important?
Yeah, I think it's EcoSpirits is now, we're active 26 markets across the world, and the numbers that we've just talked about there. Glass is it's an impressive material. It's made from natural materials and it holds liquid really well and is perfect for aging. And it's attractive and can be made into beautiful shapes. But it does, as we've seen, takes a long time to decompose. And you're right, recycling is an option. And it can be recycled without any loss of quality and is 100% recyclable. I think what often people don't understand is that you still need at least 3/4 of the energy to make a recycled bottle as you do a virgin bottle. So recycling glass is still hugely energy intensive process. And so glass is very sustainable, but only if you really plan to reuse it over and over again. And the great thing is that it can be reused many times without deterioration. So as the slide I think had up, just one of those little eco-totes in its lifespan will remove more than 1,000 bottles from circulation and production. So glass really isn't the problem. It's our single-use system is. So.
Fascinating. And Caroline, so you work across multiple industries, as you say, food and drink, etc. So what sustainable packaging solutions have you seen maybe outside of drinks that you feel our industry could take inspiration from?
Okay. Well, I was actually going to I wonder if I give this first and then we'll come back to that. I was going to give an example, and I've got a slide to bring it to life, just of Corona in terms of how they've addressed their plastic footprint. And they've done that in so many different ways. I think it's quite an inspiring example. And the reason I quickly wanted to share it was because we're having this conversation around commerciality. And there actually have been really successful from a commercial point of view. So their profitability and their financial results have been absolutely storming it the last couple of years. But also, just last week, they were heralded as the most valuable beer brand in 2024 by Kantar's Brand Z survey. So they poll citizens around the globe on loads of different brands across different sectors, and in the beer category, Corona came to the top. So I thought that was interesting because you go, financially they're driving great performance, they've also got very strong brand value, and they've also been demonstrating a lot of progress by focusing on a key issue. So what they've done since 2008 is they've put sustainability at the heart of their thinking, and particularly for their brand and their marketing. And firstly, they've thought about their own footprint. They've set that clear ambition, not initially, not in 2008, but over time, they recognised that they wanted to recover more plastic than they put out into the world through their footprint. So they made sure that they sorted that out from their own supply chain point of view, but then also, really importantly, from a citizen brand perspective, they engaged lots of other actors within their supply chain and citizens as well to drive their impact on the plastics issue as well. So I thought I'd just share some of that over time. So it started back in 2008, relatively small. It was about beach cleanups. It was about protecting the environment in which Corona is often enjoyed, and making sure that plastic was taken out of the beaches and oceans. They've spent a lot of time raising awareness of that in really creative and engaging ways so that people understood the problem. And they then went out to execute lots of different examples of taking plastic out of their supply chain. So, for example, looking at their packaging, using wheat, a byproduct, through their supply chain, and using that to create their cardboard. Using things like fit can technology to take plastics out of a 6-ring pull pack. Really importantly, engaging people and investing in startups. So there was one, Saltum, that's created this special film wrap, again, that's really compostable very quickly. But then also they've engaged other actors. So be it citizens, they created the Plastic Reality app. That was all about engaging people with their own plastic footprint and getting them to understand how much plastic they used. But they've also used things like citizen science, so engaging with people on the beaches to capture the sea level in Mexico and sharing that data back so that they could understand that as well. So lots of different creative ways to do it, but really importantly, not only minimizing their footprint so that they could be net zero on plastics in 2022, but being commercially successful and successful from a brand point of view as well.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that.
Pleasure.
And just to kind of give you my take, at least from our Avalon point of view, you know, we aren't climate science. We understand, we can read reports, we can digest information and try and make informed decisions, right? So where we've got to as a positive impact Calvados brand is that we believe our liquid to be delicious and climate positive. You know, we've done the LCAs to prove that, but then it's about how do we get that to our customers in a way that may make sense to them. So we look at multi-formats, right? So an eco-tote for the on-prem, which circular, fantastic. We do have a glass bottle. It is 65% recycled and as lightweight as possible. So it's weighing sort of 420 grams without liquid. Again, we could try and completely remove glass from our brand, but we wouldn't have a business, and that wouldn't be completely fair to the work we're doing. We're trialing this frugal paper bottle, which is 94% cardboard, has a plastic single-use pouch inside and an aluminium cap. Again, you know, plastic, we've just seen the example of Corona. It's quite an emotional material as well. People are a lot more emotional about plastic than they are glass. But again, it's our ability to recycle these things as well as reuse them that is quite critical. And I think we said it at the beginning of the session, it's all about getting on the bus, and we don't really know where it's going, but it certainly is going to take us somewhere more impactful, more meaningful than when we currently are at. So I think our resistance to change is not necessarily serving us. And so a general invitation to explore. We must continue to explore and see what solutions are available to us. And Caroline, whilst I still have your attention, you know, you do run a consultancy that advises foods and drink brands specifically, both large and small, on how to have like a meaningful sustainability agenda. What is your general advice to brands in this F&B space? And is there any partnerships or examples that you might have that you think might be inspiring for our audience today?
Yes, I'd say the first thing to do is to look at your own footprint. So the way to drive change within your own business is obviously to try and minimize the negative impacts that you have and make sure you're looking at that across all the facets of your organization. So both people and planet, get that kind of stake in the ground. And then I think to help, because there's so many different facets in sustainability, it's always useful to look at the area where you think you can drive most impact perhaps first, because what you want to do is drive some momentum on this agenda, get people excited and feeling like change is possible. And some of the things that we've talked about already take a really long time to change and implement. So the challenge with that is if that's all years away, it's difficult to keep people engaged and excited. So it's not to say those big things aren't really, really important, but also trying to look for some quick wins too, to keep everybody in the organisation on board. So once you've understood your footprint, I think then it's really looking at where are the issues that we can engage people. So it could be citizens and consumers. It could be actually the retailers. So what are the key issues that they're driving that we could help them drive more progress on and collaborate with? It could be social or environmental causes that have a relevant connection to your brand or your spirit or your drink. And then looking at what else is happening in that space, what can we be inspired from? And that's where I think you can think really broadly, and certainly way beyond just the drink space and beyond food and drink, like you say, looking at other sectors and other markets to see what's happening. And then I think it's when you bring those three things together, so it's something that citizens can care about or be educated about. It's something that you can authentically do and demonstrate progress on, hugely important to make sure we're going nowhere near greenwashing. And then looking at something you can bring your unique take to or impact in a different way, so that it can be something that feels more branded. So those would be the general bits of advice, as well as absolutely key to have your senior leadership team educated and on board. And I think I've got sadly too many examples of working with clients where that part hasn't been embedded enough. If you don't have that senior support and buy-in, both in terms of understanding the length of time some of these initiatives might take and the level of investment, then it's really, really difficult to drive progress.
Thank you, Caroline. And this leads nicely on to a question we've actually got from the audience here, Andrew Stark, specifically asking about consumer perception. First of all, I'd love if we could address that word consumer. It's a word that we've learned to use. And one, Caroline, I noticed you don't use at all. Could you maybe tell us why that is?
Yeah, so we use the word citizen because we're looking at everybody in the world and driving long-term well-being for all. So what we want businesses to be a force for good and to drive positive impacts. Therefore, whether you're a consumer, a user, of that brand or organization. We don't want to, one, negatively impact people, whether they're using it or not, but ideally we want to drive positive impacts for all. So that's the reason in that. And why sustainability marketing in our minds needs to come much closer together is because the citizen agenda or people's agenda, the expectation is more that brands and companies will solve this than governments. Now, in the past, it would have absolutely been a regulatory expectation of, oh, don't worry about that. Governments all set those rules and principles. The expectation is, sadly, that won't necessarily happen these days. So they're looking for businesses to rise to the challenge. And that's why it is an agenda that everybody needs to have a focus on.
Thank you. And Andrew, you mentioned, is there this increasing skepticism around some of these sustainable practices, missions, messages we're receiving from brands? I think some of us agree that there probably is. And actually that leads us to our next poll question, which is, would you pay £1 or €1 or $2 more for a sustainable serve in a bar? So you walk into, what bar should we walk into today? A Drake and Morgan, and they have a specific menu saying that this is their Star Hero sustainable sipper for the summer. It costs £1 more. Do you buy it? I mean, obviously you need to like the way it sounds, but do you pay £1 more? Yes or no? This should be a quick one, Aaron. What's our answer?
All right.
Ooh, so it depends on the serve. I'm assuming that's more to do with flavor. Does it sound like anything at all I might want to drink? The no, I'd love to hear from the no in the chat. Why would you not? And then moving on, the next question says, do you trust or even believe the sustainable serve claim on that menu? So you're in a Drake and Morgan, they're going to introduce you to their super sustainable summer sipper. Do you believe them? Yes or no?
I think, commenting on Amanda's question, but where does that extra £1 go, is the fact that that bar has spent £1 extra on buying sustainable brands. So that's where the £1 goes. Yeah.
At least you hope so.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's the answer? Do we trust or do we not?
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Depends on the brand. No, and only an 8% yes.
This kind of highlights the whole problem, right?
Yeah. This is, Two Drifters' exact issue.
So, Two Drifters, talk to me about this topic. I know that you have spent a lot of time crafting some beautiful serves, and that it's really important as a small brand and even a large brand to have a strong drink strategy, right? What are your learnings and what do you have to say about this?
I think from Two Drifters' point of view, we have always, as in we built our brand around the whole footprint. And we've just spent, an hour talking about mainly packaging. So mainly what we're putting the liquid in and how that's lightweight or recyclable or renewable or refillable or ends glass. But that actually takes out a lot of the responsibility for the manufacturing of the liquid. And from our point of view, packaging is 1/3 of our footprint.
Yep.
So there's still so much brands can do for the liquid and making that more sustainable than just kind of the packaging. And I know that consumers and buyers only see the packaging, so it's an easy, quick win to put it in a sustainable package, and therefore you can advertise it as a sustainable product. But we go so much further with Two Drifters, the point being that we want to own a rum distillery. We've made those carbon emissions, so it's we're responsible for removing them or avoiding them or just getting them out. So we take into the whole process, and that even comes to the serves we have here at our bar when we do our tastings. We think a lot about how we're going to serve our rum, what we're going to put it in. Has the footprint completely gone because we're now adding something that's been shipped from middle of nowhere to get to here that we're using 2 drops of? Doesn't work. So yeah, we did quite an awesome study, didn't we?
Yeah, so we were looking at specifically daiquiris, probably the best way to have our white rum. And
Mind us what a daiquiri is?
yeah, sure. So simple
The
drink.
best drink in the world.
You just add 2 drifters, white rum, lime, and sugar syrup. Easy as that. But we focused in on the limes and wanted to try and understand the carbon impact of where your lime comes from, so that we could understand the footprint of that drink. And actually, there's really interesting findings from it that it does matter massively where your lime comes from. So if your lime is from South America or South Africa, and it's traveling to the UK, it probably has a negative impact on the planet. And the difference when you switch to a European lime, so if it comes from south of Spain, say, is that even if it is flown to the UK, which is obviously the worst way for it to get here, it still removes more carbon than all of that processing and journey emits. And that's because there's so much of the carbon is taken in by the lime tree itself and not actually in the lime product. So it's just one example really of how your drink and the other ingredients that go into the drink need to be thought about when you're considering the footprint of a serve. But it's a nice little bit. European limes.
Yeah.
European limes, understood.
For us.
Well, I was going to say one day we should have an daiquiri and an appletini battle. But if I speak to sort of our experience with Avalon, you know, we've tried over the past 5 years to really build these sustainable serve collabs. Have one in place with Eco Spirits and London Essence that have a 0 glass waste tonic tap. So we're trying to put together this sustainable spritz, which is again 0 glass waste sustainable, yummy, delicious serve. But also we've found that sometimes communicating on sustainability when people are in a bar/pub setting doesn't always land well. Some people just want a great tasting drink that doesn't cost the planet, but they don't want to know more. They don't need to know more. So we've recentered a lot of our efforts into just talking about apples are delicious, apples are great for the planet, drink an appletini with Avalon. But what I find interesting is that over the years, we've seen some of our customers really pick up on our values and mission as a brand. So we currently have a B positive martini on menu at Drake & Morgan. A lot of our effort at Avalon from a charitable contribution via 1% for the Planet is with bumblebees. So for the UK, we donate to the Bumblebee Conservation Trust. And so it's quite interesting for us to see how our customers interpret what we do. I have another example from one of the best bars in the world, which is called Panda & Sons in Edinburgh. They have a drink on menu called Core Values. Again, reference to apples, but also it's a drink that basically uses no ice and it's all kind of freezer cold. And so you do see customers wanting to communicate somewhat on your behalf on the brand values because it brings to life their values in turn as businesses and drinks creators. So there's definitely some work for us to do with our audience today for you to feel more, I suppose, trust, to feel more trust, to have more trust, to want to believe that what these drinks and pubs and bars are offering is genuine. And it's slightly disheartening to hear that is already broken. And there's an example that's been put in the chat. One answer, Brewdog. I do feel you on that, and I would agree. Unfortunately, there have been some examples of greenwashing that have really harmed the rest of the good initiatives. And so this is really something, Caroline, you're specialized in, I would say. Like, how can we make sure that those that are doing the greenwashing are not harming all of us trying to do the right thing?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a bit of a mix. There's absolutely greenwashing going on. I'm reassured because the regulation in this space is really, really tightening up. My concern is at the other end, which is that regulation is scaring marketing professionals so much they don't necessarily want to go near this topic for brand campaigns, because the risk is they might not get it right and the education isn't strong enough. So on the one hand, obviously, I absolutely don't want people greenwashing at all. It's got to be robust, it's got to be backed up and demonstrated what the impact is by science. But, oh yeah, thank you. What I'm really aware of, so this is data from the World Federation of Advertisers, and what this is, it was a survey that went out last year globally to all of their membership. What this says is that marketeers were very aware that more urgent and ambitious sustainability agenda was needed across all our organisations. So this isn't only the drinks industry, it's across marketing globally as a whole. And there was real recognition that actually people wanted there to be bolder and stronger communication on the sustainability agenda. And that's all about raising the profile and the issues and the educational points, the things that we've been talking about through this webinar, that so many people simply don't know the science or the facts, or aren't joining the dots on these issues, or caring enough about them simply because they don't know. So there's a massive role, certainly for marketing, to reconsider how it operates. At the moment, it's super linear. It's generally on results, on profits, on sales. It needs to evolve to be much more than that. So just as the conversation we've been having is around the triple bottom line, just on the next slide, it needs to think about the role that it plays in inspiring people. So we know that we need to have rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented change. That whole point of actually, we need urgency on this agenda. It needs to happen now. Actually, one of our great tools to do that is marketing, in terms of engaging people, stakeholders and citizens on this, from being an industry that drives unsustainable consumption, uses of all natural resources like water and land usage simply can't go on the way that they are today. But what we need to evolve into is an industry that's there to drive, as I said, long-term well-being for people and planet, one that's creating a thriving future for all. But that's a massive mindset shift, and we are nowhere near there yet. That's why we've got to start with the education first before we can move on.
All right, that's super interesting. And I think there's a comment here from John around credibility and, made up sustainability stamps, and how could you show that you genuinely are a company that can be trusted? And I think, that obviously for me invokes things around accreditation. B Corp comes to mind first and foremost. Caroline, do you just want to build on that before I
I think one of the biggest challenges is literally the volume of accreditations, and that's a problem from two perspectives. One, actually for businesses to try and work out, like, which accreditation do I go after? Which one is most appropriate? I mean, forget about the fact of which one could I afford or implement. But then there's the other side of things, of, again, back to citizens and education. Because there are so many, it's bamboozling. And I now might see a little graphic, and at times you've seen, for example, in the chocolate industry, literally made up accreditations. A really classic one, Mondelez, and their own sustainability accreditation. If you've seen the dispatches last year, they went undercover and discovered, again, from a citizen and consumer point of view, people were buying their chocolate believing it to be highly purposeful through their Cocoa Life initiative. The reality in their supply chain was anything but. So again, that's a real challenge. So absolutely, it's about having robust and recognised standards. From our perspective, we would always advise ones that are backed by science, and again, ones that you can measure and demonstrate from. Absolutely not advocates for making your own up. That definitely doesn't work.
Can you give us a top line example of a few certificates that you think are of value?
So, I think it depends on the scale of your business. I would definitely say science-based targets are really strong in terms of their accreditation. Are they so good for a smaller business? Potentially not. You might not have the resources to do that. Whilst there's obviously been lots of examples of where B Corp, the performance of B Corps have been called out. There's a classic that we've had already mentioned in the chat with Brewdog. On Brewdog, though, I was going to say, so absolutely they were called out for particularly toxic work culture. They were obviously booted out of B Corp as a result of that investigation. I think it's been quite interesting to see their recovery from that. So they have implemented a big cultural change program, and actually, whether you believe it or not, they've got into the Sunday Times best employers lists and various other accreditations, and they've put out a lot of James Watts has put out a lot of personal kind of updates on the progress and mistakes that he has made. And I think that's quite valuable, actually. We're not all perfect. It is about progress over perfection, not to endorse what was going on in that toxic work culture. Absolutely not. But I think the good thing was they were kicked out of the club, if you like, and they have been responding to try and improve their progress and put change in place.
So, Russ, you have a PhD in organic chemistry, and yeah, you yourself have called out the problem we have and the challenges of science-based targets before. What is currently your feeling towards them, and how does this all resonate with you? You know, Two Drifters is a B Corp, Avalon is a B Corp. Eco Spirits, are you still pending, or are you B Corp yet? You are? So pending. You know, quite complex analysis going on there at Eco Spirits, I can imagine. But Russ, what are your thoughts on accreditation, and where are we going with it?
It's an ongoing discussion, because actually, well, as Caroline said, it doesn't necessarily work for small businesses. The biggest issue that you have is, as they stand at the moment, science-based target is probably the biggest one globally, and maybe the most rigorous, and with science in the name it should be, but it's the one that probably will end up being a global standard, if it isn't already. It has an issue that you need to be bad first and work towards a journey of being better, which means you cannot start a business, be really, really good from the very beginning, as we've tried to do with Two Drifters, and then say, okay, we don't have a journey to net zero, there isn't a path, because that's where well, then you can't be accredited. So
no, we score really badly.
That's not a sensible kind of setup. So there's a bit missing, and I think the job is on us there to get in touch and maybe help them understand what's required and show why we think they need to change that mindset. But yeah, I think in terms of other accreditation, it's important that it's always rigorous, it's always peer reviewed in the way that good accreditation should be.
I don't think there's one that we trust either as Two Drifters, who are constantly looking for the most sustainable process, initiative, everything. There's not one that we necessarily completely want to be part of yet.
No, but B Corp is obviously one that we've signed up to, and I think that's more a case of we wanted to educate ourselves on other aspects of sustainability, which is just such a big term that catches everything, but even and ESG might be even worse. But basically it's all those parts of the business that aren't thinking about your carbon emissions. How could we be better? And we wanted to implement that from early days within Two Drifters, and so that's why we chose B Corp as that journey to help us, because it constantly makes you move forward and makes you try and make the business better.
I think, Steph, you and I've mentioned it before, that when you've done B Corp, you realize it's not a sustainable accreditation. It's not one that is for the world's most sustainable spirits will be B Corp. We did very well in our sustainability side on our B Corp sector, but we learned so much from the other sectors, didn't we?
Yeah, once you move out of the environmental bits and to the governance and to how you look after your workers and how you are responsible in a social way.
Your pension, your banking.
Yeah,
everything.
all those aspects, they really filter into it.
These are the things that I suppose, you know, drinker X walking into bar X isn't necessarily seeing. They don't know that Avalon Calvados banks with Triodos, which is the leading sustainable bank in the world, that doesn't invest in any fossil fuel companies whatsoever. But behind that B Corp logo are all of these additional kind of to the core sustainable plays, builds, you know, and it can be quite complex to run a business ethically well beyond sustainability claims. So I think there's something to be said for B Corp still.
Yeah.
We have 9 minutes before we wrap this up. And so I will invite the audience now to start dropping any specific questions they may have for one of our panelists. And in the meantime, we will launch perhaps our last poll.
Yeah.
So this one is, what's the one thing from this discussion that you'll take away as the most relevant for your brand and business? So that is helpful guidance for us and Aaron and the WonderNETwork events. These sessions really are here to add value and help evolve the conversations. And so as we start to receive the questions, maybe I'll start with you now, Ian, because you've been quiet for a little bit. So we've spoken about a lot today, and we've addressed, the ecosystem, the case for commercialization, the responsibility of gatekeepers, the closed loop system, the role of citizens, responsible marketing, and much more. How would you summarize the opportunity / challenge that we face, and what's the one key takeaway you'd like our audience to have today?
Thanks, Steph. Hopefully I'll do this rather succinctly. I think becoming more sustainable, and within that there's probably a requirement for further definition, but it doesn't necessarily mean added costs or time-consuming processes. That switching to reuse, and obviously there's a lot of brands represented on this call today, the industry can actually be more sustainable. It can be more efficient, and it can be more cost effective. And from an EcoSpirits point of view, focusing on a reuse system that offers 30 to 50% reduction in storage space for outlets, and for brand owners and distributors reducing packaging waste by 95%, which still protects the liquid and the integrity of that, and the citizens or guests' brand experience. That's for me, hopefully something that someone or some people might take away.
Amazing. Thank you for that. I'm going to start taking a couple of questions. I'll let you look at the takeaway answers there on the screen. But what is it? 54%. The role of citizens, brands, and policymakers working together to drive meaningful change towards sustainability. Caroline's going to be so happy with that. Andrew, I love your the succinct part of your question is, how can we shorten the time between what you're calling unconscious competence with conscious competence? I'd say it's a question we all have on our minds. I don't know, Caroline, Russ, Gemma?
This is an issue close to my heart, because we need to be quicker at adapting to climate change, but how you get there and the sustainable journeys are going to take longer to explain, because we can't just plant a tree and solve the problem. It takes longer to explain, but we need to get to the explanation and get people to understand quicker. So yeah, I don't know.
Work in progress.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to? Caroline, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there is this role for education. It comes back, the classic quote from David Attenborough, saving the planet is now a communications challenge. So I think part of that is just getting it on people's consciousness, but also being very careful about how that's done. So ideally, not doing it in a doom and gloom way, actually trying to bring joy and the positivity of what that new future could look like and the benefits of that. So I think that's part of the challenge. I think what we've struggled with over recent years is sometimes straying into actually turning people off, and where they then kind of shut down and don't listen to this as an important narrative to consider.
Fab, thank you. And we have time for another question. Katie, I will direct yours, I think, first to Ian, because Ian, you're working with 1, 2, 3, 4 maybe of the biggest global drinks companies in the world, alongside the independent smaller brands. And so they do tend to have their fine and rare, ultra mega super duper luxe divisions. What are your thoughts on whether one day the citizen perception on secondary packaging will evolve for the fine and rare, and will brands ever stop pushing out these secondary packs?
Thanks, Katie, for the question. I think, at EcoSpirits, we don't think that EcoTotes will remove every single bottle. That's not necessarily the immediate aim, because you're right, there are some that 4.5 litres may take a little while to consume in certain bars. So that's one aspect. I think that there are already companies removing boxes and some elements, so that has started. And I think there will be other solutions, and as we develop, primarily focusing in the on-trade at present, but with retail solutions to come, then that will definitely grow. And outside of our industry, retailers at all levels, whether it's premium or entry level, are looking at how a circular packaging system could be used. And so do I think they'll ever move away from it? I think there's a lot of ifs in there. If you're spending a huge amount of money on a bottle of something, the fact that there might be legislation in the future that increases the cost of it by 2, 3, 4, 5, 20%, is that really going to make you stop buying it? But for others, we know that there's a solution. So I think Katie, there's no doubt, which the look of a beautiful bottle and brands that spend years developing that and having it stand out on a back bar is really important. And that's why we have solutions that don't remove that. And I think therefore individuality is really important for brands to set themselves apart. So I think it's not, we're not focusing on fine and rare at the moment, but there's definitely work that's already underway by many brands to remove that.
Katie, check out what Louis XIII are doing. And I think the answer's in your question, rare. I think rare is fine. What we need to change is the mass, the scale, where the big every single day impact and consumption is happening. We are out of time, so I will share a parting visual for you all to just end this session on. For me personally, sustainability is very much also about spirituality. Like, it is my belief that we are conscious beings having human experiences, that we are all interconnected in this mycelium network that we call life. And so I think just a reminder that our ability to dream is exactly how we've come to create the world we are in, and we can change it irreversibly, positively, transform it for the collective good of everyone. So if you have one takeaway, at least from me, it would be that please trust that you are able, you are capable, and we are all worthy of living in a balanced, harmonious world. Heaven on earth can be true. Thank you all for joining us. Aaron, I will let you close the session, but just my personal thanks, Russ, Gemma, Caroline, Ian, a pleasure to share this session with you today.
Yeah, I'll second that. Thank you, Steph, so much for hosting, and to all our panelists. It's been very engaging and I've learned quite a lot, have lots of ideas.